The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hello and welcome to Hidden Horsepower on Total Seal Piston Rings, Facebook, YouTube, and social channels. My name is Joe Costello, and we've got a great episode for you today. Let's bring on our guests. Of course, everybody knows Mr. Lake Speed Jr. Lake, it's not live, we're recording, but it is a video edition. Some of these are audio shows, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, for people that are driving over the road. This one, though, we've got a little multimedia experience. We got a couple of guests that you have been working on a few things together. So we decided we're going to devote a little time, just about an hour, to a video production for everybody wants to sit and watch and learn. This is going to be really cool.
Well, when you have Billy and Ben, we have all of this testing experience. The video version tends to be pretty good because we can show some of the things we're talking about. Now, for those who are just listening audio-wise, we will definitely try to explain what we're showing. That way you can still get some benefit of it. But the pictures are going to be pretty cool. So maybe if you are really interested later on, go back and watch it on YouTube or something later. That'd be fun. Yeah.
Or vice versa. Maybe you're watching on YouTube, but you got to go. And that's why you subscribe to the Apple Podcast or Spotify or SoundCloud. And really a good reason to follow all the different social media channels that Total Seal Piston Rings has, especially YouTube. I know so many people that they listen to YouTube while it's playing in their pocket. They got it coming through their car speakers. Let's bring on our guests. Right, Mr. Ben Strader, he's become a regular. Mr. EFI University, he's out there somewhere and freshly get in the middle of the screen, guys. You're monitoring yourselves. And Billy Godlbold, who has been on in the past, is joining us once again. Hello, Billy. Hello, Ben. Welcome. How are you guys?
Hey, good to be on.
I'm doing fantastic. Great to be here, guys.
Excellent. And from what I understand, Ben is like fresh back from vacation, Lake, so he's going to be bringing it today.
Oh, absolutely.
Ready to be back to the grind.
Back to the grind. The last time I saw Lake, it was in Piney Flats, Tennessee, just before the Bristol NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals. We had the big honing class, Lake. You want to summarize that real quick before we move forward in the world of ring seal and all the things we got going on? I'll tell you that I was very impressed. I took in the whole class, and what surprised me the most was you had people from all over the country who flew in, to take in the class, and they were engaged every second of the deal, which is not always the case.
Oh, it was incredible, Joe. Like you said, the people were super engaged. The class started at 8 in the morning with just kind of introductions, look around the shop, have a little bit of breakfast, then kick off at 9. It was going to go to 5 o'clock. We were still there at 8:30 before people were finally done, because they were so engaged in what we were doing that we went beyond just, we started off in the morning when we did a couple hours in the classroom, going through the lectures and stuff. And we were very fortunate that our buddy, Dr. Marburg, who's been on Hidden Horsepower a couple of times now, came down from Indiana and donated his time and really gave a deep dive on surface finish and understanding the numbers and what metrology is all about. And we're actually going to cover some more stuff later today that relates to his work on surface finish, actually not on a piston ring, because Hidden Horsepower isn't just about piston rings. I love piston rings, but there's more to it than just piston rings, especially when we got Billy around. We're going to talk camshafts. It's going to happen, right? So, but we really went through the surface finish part of everything with Mark, and then Scott Rowe from Roller was there, and we really talked about honing. But then we went back in hands-on honing class. Guess what? We had a block, and we spent hours going through demonstration on honing. But then it was kind of fun. We took one of my dad's old blocks, which we have an ongoing project we're working with, and had a little problem we needed to fix. And we said, all right, who wants to hang around while we fix this? Because we're going to fix it. And pretty much everyone but 2 people that had to go catch a plane to go back home stayed. And they stayed until we finished it. And the one comment I heard over and over again was, man, that was so cool, because that was real world. We started off in the morning with the lecture, talking about things in theory. Then we moved to that hands-on experience of honing the school block and working through the things. But then we put all of it into practice. And we had a real block with a real customer with a real time frame. And we had to make it happen. And that was the best part of the whole thing, is it all came together. And we were exhausted after that, but it was fantastic.
Excellent. No, it was great stuff. And just seeing so many people that were engaged and into it, like you say, like they were not at a school. They knew that they were getting something positive out of it. All right.
Well, we tried to give them the real EFI University experience. I've been to enough of Ben's classes that's what it's like. When you go to Ben's, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get the lecture. You're going to get the theory. You're going to get to do it yourself. But then in the end, it's going to be something real. You're going to do it. It's not just hearing it. You got to do it, get your hands on it, and that's how you learn. And so I've learned a lot from my good buddy Ben. So we tried to do our best to give him the full Ben Strader experience, even though Ben wasn't there.
I'm honored that you took my lead by example spirit. I got to share real quick my favorite all-time story of classes that we did. A few years back, I had one of my competition engine development classes, and it was exactly like what you were just saying. Like, so I had these 4 students that came to the class, and as it turned out, because of a delay in shipping, this was in 2020 during all like the weird COVID stuff and everything. I had been waiting on the engine for our race team with Robbie Blankenship, our small block Ford program, to show up, and it was delayed. And it was really a time crunch. Like, it was one of those things where class was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I was hoping to have, the engine the week before, and it didn't show up. So anyway, a couple of the students in the class knew about our race program and had been watching. And as it turns out, the engine ends up showing up on the last day of the class. The guy shows up and says, you got a forklift and whatever. And so the way the time was, I was like, man, as soon as class is over, I'm going to have to stay late and kind of do some work tonight. And one of the guys in the class said, well, would you mind if I looked over your shoulder? And so, of course, that was like, well, if he stays, can I stay? And so all 4 of the students end up saying like, well, would you mind? I'm like, all right, look, guys, you can stick around and you can watch, but to be fair, class is over. And now I have to do my job and work. So I might have to stay a couple hours. Well, as it worked out, we get this thing out of the crate. It was, we ended the class at 5, went and got something to eat. 7 p.m. we get the thing out of the crate. We stripped the whole entire engine down, put the block in the Rottler hone, honed it, and had it all the way back together by 6 a.m. the next morning. And Robbie calls me to say, hey, did the engine show up? I'm like, yeah, dude, it's going back in the crate. It's ready to come back to you. And he was like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, we stayed up 24 hours straight with these guys in the class. So now the greatest part of the story, though, is I had to get it there. He gets it in the car. I get on an airplane. I go meet up with him in Michigan to do this race. Well, one of the guys in that class, Matt Wire, lived in Ohio, and he said, I never in a million years thought that I would get to see inside of one of the engines that at this level. And now, I got to touch it and help you work on it and help put it together. And it was so great experience. Well, he ends up bringing his family to the racetrack that weekend to see this engine. And lo and behold, we win the race. So it was awesome. All the 4 students in the class, I got goosebumps just thinking about it, right? It was such an amazing experience to get to share with those students. And we've become lifelong friends. And, that's, by the way, that's, Angelina, who was at your hunting class. Mm-hmm. She was one of those 4 students, Chrissy Askus, Matt Wire. So, dude, it was amazing to have that learning experience and show them real world. But then, proof is in the pudding, and we go out and win the race. They're fans for life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right. That's cool.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
It's my favorite story of all my years of training.
Well, you're hands-on. You get the experience. You're part of the experience, and you carry that. I'm sure they're telling that story over and over again to their, people that they're passing the knowledge to. So, Lake, take it away. Obviously, you guys, you're going to get Billy involved, and you're going to talk some things and reference what you want up on the screen, and I will try to add a funny quip every once in a while because that's why I'm here.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Joe. So, a few months back, me and Billy happened to be out in Lincoln. Actually, we were in Kearney, Nebraska. We stopped in Lincoln on the way at the American Museum of Speed. If you haven't seen the video that we did with Mitchell Stapleton on that amazing museum, go watch it on YouTube later. Not now, just go later, go to YouTube and look it up. It's fantastic. But we were stopped in Lincoln because we were on the way to Kearney, Nebraska for an AERA event at Blueprint Engine. So Norris Marshall and those guys out there doing an incredible job. This your idea of what your impression of Kearney, Nebraska, and what is they're doing at Blueprint Engines, I guarantee you doesn't add up unless you've actually been there. It's an amazing facility, incredible work they're doing out there at Blueprint Engines. And they had an ARA event there to kind of, help the industry. And ARA is always trying to do educational things, just like we do here on Hidden Horsepower. And Billy was giving a talk about the evolution of pro stock. What have we learned in 20 years ago? Like, I think the idea was like, what would you tell yourself 20 years ago, right? Or future self would tell yourself, hey, here's the things you need to be working on, right? But one of the things he mentioned in that talk was the fallacy of ABA testing, because that, I know we are touching the third rail. We are saying blasphemous things.
I mean, this is sacred text, okay?
Oh yeah. We are throwing down the tablets now, right? When we're doing this, that ABA testing can lie to you, and more than likely does lie to you. So, Billy, I'm going to hand it to you now.
No, I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because, where I started in that presentation is, basically comes back from the museum. As we were walking around the museum, we saw one of Garlett's cars, and it had heads by Mondello down the side of the car. And it was kind of awesome. And then I was realizing, okay, tomorrow I'm going to talk about something that Joe Mondello did wrong. So, I mean, and Joe Mondello, just one of the absolute treasures of our industry, one of the smartest, best guys I ever met. But when it came to his Oldsmobile engines, well, he always ran, a 11/30 seconds push rod, so he was always running the small push rods in his engines. And I'm like, we were at a old ATC conference, and, Joe goes, well, I've never broken a push rod. And I'm like 25 years old. I'm standing up on the podium, and it's like, well, Joe, have you ever broken anything else? And he's like, well, yes. So, well, Joe, let me explain this as simple as I can. If a push rod fails, it probably wasn't the push rod's fault. Something probably stopped the valve from moving or stopped the rocker from rocking. Something else happened, and the push rod just took the blunt and it blew like a fuse. But when anything else in the valve train breaks, it could be the push rod's fault. And what goes on is that push rods, got one on my desk. Push rods are extremely, extremely stiff in compression. Whether they're a half inch like this guy, or whether they're 7/16, 3/8, 11/30 seconds, whatever size they are, on 5/16, they're going to bend, based on, they're going to bend, not compress. Well, when they bend, that deflection robs the engine of duration, but it also makes the valve train faster than it would be. So you get a valve train that squeezes in the bottom and kind of pulls the top up. So he's using these small push rods, these 5/16 push rods, and he's saying, oh, they don't fail, Billy. Whenever he put a 3/8 or a 7/16 push rod in his engine, it would make less power. And what didn't work in Joe's mind is that, hey, the camshaft that he had evolved to, the camshafts that he was running, were the right size duration-wise for the push rod, for his flexible valve train system. When he stiffened up his valve train, now his camshafts were way too big. Not only were they way too big on the seat, they also weren't lofting like they were the small push rods, like a pole vault. Well, and some guys go, hey, okay, well, that pole vaulting, that's not all bad. You say it squeezes the bottom, makes more on top. That's good, right? Well, the problem is that your camshaft, your valve durations are always variable. You start out with a really big camshaft at low RPM. And as the RPM goes higher and higher, the loads go higher and higher, these things bend, and the camshaft gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's the exact opposite of what you want. You really want to start with the small camshaft and end up with a big camshaft. So that's kind of the thing that because Joe would do the testing that he knew how to do, which was to take one piece out, A out, stick B in, then come back to A, and then you look at the dynos, and whichever one's better is the better part. Well, I can tell you today that you couldn't win a race with those, 10-inch long, 5/16 push rods. There's just no way. Nothing, is going to would have worked there. So, that's kind of one of those sacred cows, though. People don't understand that these engines today are so developed that when you change one part and don't re-optimize, you're out in left field.
So we like to say that the engine's a series of dependent events, right? Any one part that you change has an effect on way many other parts than just the thing you changed. And so, we're all guilty of it. We've for years talked about ABA type of testing, but I think the intention was in doing ABA or talking about ABA was to make sure that you were trusting that you collected good data. The problem came in with the way we thought about and analyzed the data that we got. Instead of saying like Billy was pointing out, well, that part didn't make more power, so that part wasn't better. It may just be that part didn't fit into your system of interconnected and dependent events, and it made some other parts mad. Like you talked about, now my camshaft's too big. Well, that doesn't mean the push rod was bad. It was just not a good, member of society. It wasn't a good part of that system.
Well, it's really about you're saying is that it's a system. Like you can have system A, system B, system A. Well, that's fair. But individual parts will totally, lie to you or not tell you the whole truth. I think about the engine project we've been working on with Dad's piece, taking that old Ford C3 engine and bringing it back to life. One of the recent tests we did, because we got so many questions about the first one where it picked up, 300 horsepower, so it was hurt, so it was way down. So when it comes back up, we're like, well, what part of that was the valve train? What part of that was the pistons or the rings or this or that? Well, you really can't break out, like Billy said, one component and say, well, what's one component worth? It won't work that way. But we did say, okay, well, let's look at that piston ring cylinder system. So we did just take one engine and left the valve train alone and just did hone, rings, pistons. Well, just that system of going from a full round piston, old school 400 grit, single finish with 043 ductile moly top ring, 1/5 3 millimeter oil, made that change to a side release style piston, modern plateau hone, 0.7.72 millimeter steel ring set. Well, that picked up 40 horsepower as a system.
Right. And that well with rings, because people always talk about that. I love the guys that do the Engine Masters show, but they like the ABA stuff because that's kind of how you did things back in the day. And they'll do like an ABA on a ring, and it's like, guys, that doesn't work. You can't just take a piston and put one side's ring in the other side's ring and not change how you hone it, and not change, like, say if you have a really small ring that's designed, a really thin small ring that's designed to run with the dry sump with vacuum in the pan, and then you try to run it in a motor that doesn't have pan back, and you're like, oh, it doesn't seal. Well, duh, it's not, it's, and I don't mean to be mean to it, because these guys, no one's doing something wrong to you. They've just been told over year after year after year, the way you evaluate components is you change one component, you make a test, you change one component, you make a test. And and there's a level that will get you to that's not terribly bad, but once you try to get past that level, you got to stop. When you looked at back in the day when Toyota came into NASCAR, they started talking about their engines and generations, and then, of course, clearly, the Chrysler did it too with their stuff. Saw the R7 P8 and all that kind of stuff. And basically what they're talking about is it's generation this and, iteration this, so you saw that going all through. And when that mindset came is when engines took a huge step forward, because these guys understood that there was only a few things they could do. You know, you've either got to increase the volumetric efficiency, how well the engine's feeling, or you have to increase the improve the brake specific, which means either reducing friction or increasing combustion efficiency. So either the efficiency change or airflow change. Nothing else was going to make more power. So when they started looking at a component, they would take the next phase of engine would be a totally new engine. And it took what they learned from the first stage and it moved it up and it said, what can we do that could make this engine better? And then it re-optimized over that motor. And the motor they were taking to the racetrack didn't change. You know, they worked on this motor and it was this iteration. This is your race motor. And then they had a development motor with some new parts in it. The development motor, they kept working on it until it was better and more durable than the race motor. Then this development motor becomes the race motor. And you start all over with another development idea. So it's not where you're changing components on a race motor. It's where you have your race motor that you build by the book, the same way over and over again. Then you have your development motor where you try new ideas and then rub on them and optimize them. And if you don't do that, you get locked into this thing that's, you know, that's just unyielding.
You know, Billy, there's some opportunities where some of that ABA testing might make sense. You know, for example, if you had a specific package within a set of rules, I got to run this manifold and this header and whatever, then my system is kind of set for me. But let's say, you know, where you and I have done Spintron work and we've got a family or a series of load profiles that produce, you know, valve motion that we like. Well, then we might want to test a few camshaft durations or center lines against each other. You know, and that might be a place where I could say, put this one in. Okay, now put that one in. But most of the time, if we're not locked into that system, we need to be thinking about, okay, I put this in and the result was X. It was better or worse, but why? What else got better or worse because of this part? And I think that's the more systems-minded approach that seems to be producing much better long-term results these days than just a parts approach.
Right, but even those guys who and even the ABA guys knew a little bit, right? Because if you do an Engine Masters, at least when they change parts, hopefully they'll reset the air fuel, you know, try to get it back, and then they'll do a little bit of a timing sweep. So they get that. On your idea, like on a, I'll say some sort of lift rule motor, you have to, or crate motor, you have to run this valve spring. Well, maybe you could run this valve spring at a couple of different installed heights. Maybe you could run couple of different push rod lengths to change the rocker sweep. There's still things that when you make a change, be really careful that you re-optimize, because there's a chance that you've rubbed on your old system. You know, you have run your old system with all kinds of different air fuel. You've run your old system with all kinds of different timing. You've run your old system with different installed heights. You've run your old system with different push rod lengths. And all of a sudden, you've kind of gotten that thing happy. And there's a good chance that if the new part does a couple things, well, it's just not rubbed on like the old part was.
Well, you know, it makes me think, Billy, when we were playing with the in-cylinder combustion stuff at Ben's last time with and on exhaust, and how much the exhaust impacts the intake. Like so much more than you would think, right? You're thinking exhaust is exhaust, and they're not really talking to each other. And you're like, oh, nope, they talk to each other a lot. And that if you could very easily be trying something ABA on exhaust, and if you're not re-optimizing your airflow and making sure your fuel jetting, whatever you've got, isn't dialed back in, you could easily fool yourself, you know, or say miss something on that.
Yeah, one year I'm laughing because it was probably 10 years ago that Kazi took, and he wasn't sure what this exhaust closing was doing, and he thought, maybe, hey, I'm pulling a lot of intake charge out the exhaust during overlap because my exhaust system's pretty good, and it's just sucking in this intake through. And yeah, it kind of does that. So what he did was he closed the exhaust like 20 degrees earlier. Well, on one of his Mount Motor Pro stocks, it lost 300 horsepower. Not 3 horsepower, not 30 horsepower, 300 horsepower. And he calls me up. He goes, Billy, I lost 300 horsepower. I'm like, yeah, John, you just took your 120% volumetric efficiency engine and made it to 100 because the exhaust system can't talk to the intake anymore. It can't rob it, but it can't even talk to it anymore, And so that exhaust pulse, like you're talking about, when you open that exhaust valve, you've got 10 bar plus of pressure. So it's just boom, coming out of there. It hits the opening. It reflects back as a negative wave. When that negative wave gets there, does it let some of the intake flow through? Absolutely. But it's going, come on, guys, come on over here. And it builds up all this momentum, which makes the cylinder feel so much better. I mean, if you think about, the piston isn't driving that pressure differential to 70 degrees after TDC. That's when you have peak piston velocity, 7 degrees after. You're opening the intake, 50 plus degrees before. You've just given yourself 120 degrees more duration if you can make these things talk to each other. So basically, You've got a 30% increase in the time to fill the cylinder. Well, if you open the intake valve, but there's nobody going, hey, guys, come on. It doesn't do anything. It reminds me of when I was a kid, I used to duck hunt. You do the hell call for the duck, and you're sitting there quacking, and you're basically the duck saying, hey, guys, we got stuff. Hey, come on over. Come on, do a feeding call, tell them, hey, we got food. You know what I mean? And then they come. The ducks will just come on in. The same thing with the air. If you can get that exhaust, you need that exhaust to yell back at that intake and say, guys, come on over here. This is fun.
So duck call exhaust, Joe. That's a new thing.
We're going to put a reed in there and try to make one really quack when it,
That exhaust is quacking. That's the good one right there. The one that quacks. The one that's good.
I don't do duck calls, guys. I would jump in here, but I don't have any.
But no, the thing is, and Ben and I were talking about this, people who look at the 4 strokes of an engine, people who study cylinder pressure and cam timing, they'll tell you that, exhaust valve opening is kind of a Peter to Paul type setup. If you open the exhaust too late, you get all this residual exhaust in the chamber that has to be pushed out by the exhaust valve. By the piston. So you have to do work to push the exhaust out. It's not that it doesn't scavenge enough. It's that it actually creates work on the top of the piston to push it out. Well, but if you open the exhaust valve too early, you're robbing yourself from the power stroke as the exhaust is pushing down on the piston. You're taking away this force down because now it's going out the exhaust valve. Well, that part of the pumping loop, if you look, it looks like a figure 8. The bottom part of that figure 8 is the pumping loop. That's the exhaust at the bottom pushing out. Well, normally think open the exhaust earlier and earlier and earlier is just about making that pumping loop small. But what Ben and I have seen several times is it's not just making that pumping loop small. That exhaust opening event has to do with the header length or when it gets back. So when you get that boom, when it goes and opens the exhaust valve, that wave goes out the exhaust pipe, it reflects back. If the header is too long, you're going to need that exhaust valve opening earlier so that it's timed right getting back.
It's one of those things I remember really not all that long ago, Billy, a month or so ago even, like it hasn't been that long. I remember sending you a message going, after looking at all this combustion data and really understanding a better picture of what's happening with the camshaft, I've been doing Spintron for a few years, been looking at combustion analysis. And I feel like I've spent way too much of my whole entire career discounting just how important the exhaust valve opening point was. Because for exactly what you said, we've always been told it's a wash. If you open a little early, it does this, but you pay for it over there. And if you open a little late, it does this, but then you pay for that. And so I'll be honest, I just kind of went, it's not really that important. And we just sort of, throw one over there, But the last year or so, or 2 years, I guess, of really starting to peel the layers of the onion, man, there are certain combinations I think that can be lazy and somewhat insensitive to it. But then there's these other ones, like with these supercharged engines we've been working on, man, you can't miss. It will cost you big time. So it's really sort of humbling to think that, I was always a mid-level engine builder anyway. It's not, I don't consider myself one of the greats or anything, but the reality is you think, man, I've done a lot of stuff, worked on a lot of engines, but I'm still pretty dumb. And when you get real data and you see what's going on, you look back and go, how foolish that was of me to think that anything really, but that specifically didn't matter. I almost feel like I was just being lazy. I wasn't looking hard enough, and you can't, now that you've seen it, you can't go back. You can't unsee that data and understand that it really, really matters. Every single part of the engine matters, but boy, those 4 camshaft events matter a lot.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, it's like, back to the pilot stuff. It's like getting on the wrong trajectory. If you open that exhaust valve at the wrong time, it's like having the wrong heading.
Yep. Yeah.
You're heading that way for a while.
We say that all the time. You know what I mean? Like if you leave LA in a jet and your heading's wrong by, 3 degrees, it's not really a problem if you're going to San Diego. But if you're going to New York, instead of ending up in New York, you're going to end up in like Washington, D.C. You know what I mean? So the farther away from good you get, the more those little details matter.
Yeah, and you see the guys, if you look at the guys like a Ron Shaver, some of the sprint car guys, you'll see how many, header combinations that like Andy Durham or Ron Shaver will have, because they're very easy to change on the car. They're right out there. And they're trying to get all this, the way these cars explode out of the corner. They're playing with it a whole lot. Then you look at some of the dragster setup, and they'll run a big soft exhaust. And, with that slow exhaust opening, they don't care as much because you're not creating that sharp waveform. And it's probably only been the last 10 years in pro stock and drag racing where you've really seen people in the, start using that exhaust valve opening and tuning around it. And then they get much more sensitive to headers. When you open the exhaust fast, like in pro stock, they open it very fast. But if you're wrong on the header, it's going to be a dog. So you've got to redesign the header around it. Then you get some of these road race categories and circle track categories. Some of them are hard to change headers on. So, what do you do there? I mean, I don't know. Do you spend enough time to try to figure out ways, okay, what different headers will do, knowing there may not be a ton that you can package?
Well, it's one of those things that's exactly what we're talking about. When you say, well, I changed to this new cam lobe and the engine didn't like it, so that cam lobe's not good. And you go, well, but wait a minute. The rate that exhaust valve is opening is shaping the wave, how fast and how strong that pressure is. So now all of a sudden your header length and your collector matters way more than it used to. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't that the camshaft was bad, it just wasn't a good fit for the system. I love have you seen the Burn stainless, like the adjustable collector deal they make? So when you're on the dyno, you can play with this stuff and mess around. And I think that's a really underutilized tool for a lot of engine shops that could be, honestly, like I said, all those years, I sort of said, that doesn't matter that much. But you can't look at the data and then walk away from it thinking that it doesn't matter, right? You can't go back. You can't unsee it.
No,
absolutely.
Joe, you had a picture there a minute ago of that pressure loop. You want to bring that back up real quick?
Yeah, I'm going to try, and I obviously apologize to everyone if it skips a little bit, but it seems to work when it wants to. But you'll get the gist. Ben, walk us through as it comes.
Well, it shows those two figure 8, right? And it's a very skewed figure 8. But Ben, you can take it from here.
We go.
If it comes up.
Well, yeah, either one, Billy. You're pretty good at it too, obviously. But hopefully it'll show up here in a second. We got you talked about the pressure loops, and so over to the bottom right there, what you see is the pressure against the volume in the combustion chamber that we're measuring. So across the bottom is the volume of the cylinder, and then going up the y-axis would be pressure. So you see basically these two loops. The big fat one that's going at a 45-degree angle there, that's the work loop. So from the right side of the graph, when you're at bottom dead center, going towards the left side, it goes up on this angle. That's a function of your compression ratio. So now your piston's doing a bunch of work to compress all that air and fuel. You get up there near the top of that, over on the left-hand side where our volume's getting small, near top dead center, and then the spark plug lights. And so you get this big release of heat energy, and it goes around the corner there. And now you have that slope going down from the expansion, where now your gases are putting work back into the piston. So that the area inside that whole loop that's when the work is getting done, right?
Yeah, between the green line and the blue line, that oval shape, tilted oval right there. That's the work on the piston.
Yep. So the problem is there's no free lunch. And so when you get done with all that, then you have to look at that skinnier one on the bottom. And that's, after that exhaust valve opens over there towards the right side, we're getting near bottom dead center there.
Yeah, on the blue line.
The blue line across the top. So the air is expanding. And then we open the exhaust valve. And then what happens is the pressure drops. We get to bottom dead center. Now we got to push it all out. So the piston's going, top to bottom is really displayed across the bottom of the chart there. It's basically volume. So at the right side of the chart, we have really large volume with the piston at the bottom. And at the left side of the chart, what you have is really small volume with the piston at the top. But depending on which part of the engine cycle you're on, you'll either have, the smaller loop there, the bottom one, or the bigger loop, the top one, if you're at TDC compression or TDC, exhaust.
And you can see that bottom loop grow right now as RPM goes up. And that's because you're doing more work to get that exhaust out as it goes.
So, Joe, if you scroll back to the left side there, our RPM is low there. We're at 5,200. And you'll notice that the area between the bottom loop, the line across where we're pushing the air out and then when we're drawing it back in on the intake, those are pretty close together. But as you go higher and higher in the RPMs, you'll see that bottom loop gets fatter and fatter. So notice as you scroll across there, the top loop isn't changing a whole bunch, but the bottom loop actually is. So, think about what's happening there. The higher the RPM goes, the more effort it's going to take to empty the exhaust into that same size header tube more times, right? 7,500 RPMs versus 5,200 RPMs. You're trying to push that into there. Well, if the exhaust tube, if we were really lucky and we had a vacuum cleaner on the end of the collector where we could just suck all that exhaust out, then that pressure would be really low there. It would be really great if I could drive around with a vacuum cleaner on the end of my tailpipe and it would make that loop really small. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do when we design the length, the diameter, and the taper of the collector there, the header tube length and the taper of the collector. Billy keeps talking about these waves. So this high pressure wave goes down there, and when it gets to that collector, it changes direction, it reverses, and it goes from being high pressure to low pressure, and it goes back the other direction. So we're trying to time these events so that this vacuum cleaner, this low pressure area, gets back to the exhaust valve right at the same time as it was opening, so that it helps get all that other stuff out of the chamber and helps convince that air that's waiting on the intake valve side to start coming in. The problem with the air on the intake side is it's like a lazy teenager. The valve opens and it's sitting there going, nah, I don't really want to, and so you got to do something to motivate them to get off the couch and get into the living room, in our case, the combustion chamber. So that vacuum cleaner, the low pressure area that we're artificially creating with the header, is what's getting our teenager off the couch early and getting them to come into the combustion chamber. Did I do a good job on that, Billy?
No, and you're absolutely right. And it's funny because it's not the only lazy teenager in the engine. I mean, that intake valve is sitting there, and when you push on it, it's like sitting there going, okay, a little bit, just give me a little time, Dad. I'll come on out. But that it doesn't want to move either. So there's so much of this stuff that we're telling it to do. We're telling these things, the engine, to do something, and there's just a lag from when you tell them to do it when you do it. So you have to push pretty hard.
A really great example of that would be the exhaust valve opening. Joe, can you go back real quick to our little video screenshot there? You don't even have to move it so much now.
One moment, please.
Pardon our interruption. Well, technical.
Yeah, when you're talking about, when you start talking about 140 psi plus, you know, and you've got 2 square inches, we've got 1.5 square inches, that's serious, right?
Well, if you're like the big Sorceress Pro-Mod engine, that thing's got a 2-inch diameter intake valve. So you get 6 square inches. Yep. So when we look at that loop up on the top, that big work loop, right? Mm-hmm. So down towards the bottom right, so what we're looking at is the slope of that pressure pretty much follows along that blue line, which is a mathematically calculated line that we should see. Mm-hmm. And if you just changed the pressure and volume equally all the way to bottom dead center, it would follow that line. But you notice before it gets to bottom dead center, the actual measured pressure drops below the line. Well, that's because the exhaust valve is now open. But the thing is, if you were to plot up here, which we can do here, but you don't have on your screen there, if you plotted on there, let's say you just made an X marks the spot, at the point that the camshaft was telling the exhaust valve to open, you would often see 5, 8, 10, 12, even 20 degrees of crankshaft movement from the point when the cam told the valve to open to when it actually did, when we can actually see the flow departure. And that's because of the bending in the system. You think about like a top fuel car, and you got 50 bar, you're talking about 500 or 600 PSI of pressure. And then you got a 6 square inches of area. You might have 3,000 or 4,000 pounds of force that's trying to keep that exhaust valve closed. So that means the exhaust valve doesn't want to open, the push rod doesn't want to stay straight, it wants to bend, the rocker arm wants to flex, so on and so forth.
No, it's hilarious because if you look at this is an exponential line, so it looks like it's going down linear, but that's exponential. So, when you go up just a little bit on that line, you can easily be doubling, tripling, quadrupling the pressure. People don't get this, but like if you take an NHRA Pro stock motor, it actually opens the exhaust valve before the exhaust valve on a 14,000 horsepower NHRA top fuel does. And it'd be funny if you could go call up Austin Coyle, he'd tell you, well, the reason we don't open the exhaust earlier is because we can't. Right. If you tried to open that exhaust valve 10 degrees earlier, it would probably just pull the studs right out there holding the rocker arm or break it or break the lifter or something would give. You just that's how you stress test, what part in your valve train breaks first. Just try to open the exhaust 20 degrees earlier on an NHRA top fuel motor. And it will kill it.
I used to hang out with Dale Armstrong before he passed away. And he would tell me stories about that, specifically that. He said, we wanted to open the exhaust valve earlier. And so we kept trying to move it earlier. And the darn thing would bend the push rod. So we just put a bigger push rod in it. And then it would want to break the rocker arm. So we just put a bigger rocker arm. And then it'd pull the bolts off the cylinder head that were holding the rocker arm down. So we'd put bigger ones in. And eventually we realized there's so much pressure in the cylinder, you just can't make the exhaust valve open any earlier than what we were doing. And so they didn't have like fancy combustion graphs like we have to look at. They just knew that, man, something's trying to make that valve not open. And so we're just going to put bigger parts on until it does. And eventually you just can't put big enough stuff on it.
Did you say that there's 500 PSI of cylinder pressure when they try to open the valve? Or is it more than that?
So I can't tell you what it is because I don't have actual data from a top fuel car, but it's pretty close at 90 after top dead center. It's pretty close to the same pressure they have at top dead center. That's the big difference between a top fuel car and like say a pro stocker is that nitromethane, the way that it burns so slow, it doesn't ever stop losing pressure, right? Whereas in a pro stock car, you might see, let's just say that thing sees 2,000 PSI or something like that, but for like 3 or 4 degrees across the crank rotation, and then immediately starts going down like a rock. Whereas the top fuel car might not see tons more. You might think, oh, they make 5,000 PSI or something. They really don't. It just never stops making that cylinder pressure. So it doesn't drop the same way. So by the time you get 80 or 90 or 100 degrees after top dead center, you're still pretty close to what you had near top dead center.
Right,
so I don't know the exact
number. Right across and then starts coming over way later.
Yeah, so I can't tell you the exact numbers because I haven't measured that lake. But I would not be surprised at all if it was 500 or more PSI in there with the exhaust valve trying to.
No, and there's things like, trying to figure out what was going on because they didn't have a data. There was some in-cylinder pressure gauges that would probably work for top fuel. But when Austin was there wasn't the data acquisition systems couldn't handle all the noise in a top fuel car. But so what he did was put a stop on the exhaust valve and then turn the cam with a torque wrench or a breaker bar and put the load on the push rod that it took. Like they were talking about making the push rod bigger and bigger and it's still rubbing the head. So they go ahead and load the camshaft and try to figure out how much push rod force does it take for the push rod to bend enough to rub on the cylinder head. And that was his version of a poor man's in-cylinder pressure testing to see what was going on.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Reinhardt at the last NHRA Nitro school at Bristol said he had heard numbers that was about 1,000 PSI when they were trying to open it.
So I was just about to tell you that. So if you just did some easy math, right? Even if they had, let's say 240 or 250 bar of, well, let's say between 3,600 PSI at TDC or after TDC, by the time you got to like 90 to 100 degrees after top dead center, even if you only had 30% of that value left, you'd still have over 1,000 PSI of cylinder pressure on a top fuel car.
Yeah.
That's even if you only have 30% left. And I bet you it's got more than that.
Yep.
Wow. That's crazy.
No, yeah. And that's what they're doing. And the thing is, when I started measuring some of the camshafts that came out of top fuel, I was looking at where on an EVO where the divot was. And what happens is, as you try to open it, puts a divot in the flank of the camshaft. It actually, as the cam gets thing, it puts a
crushing the cam.
Yeah, it crushes the cam on the opening ramp until it breaks. And, and I'm looking at this place where it's crushing the camshaft. And, it's kind of like walking out on a PGA course and, seeing where the divots were where they made their second shot. These things had divots, not right there at the valve opening. The valve's supposed to be open 100 thousandths. There's still a divot there. So you had 100 thousandths bend in the system before it ever broke pressure.
The hard part about that then is that whole thing is now a diving board, right? Like
yes.
You just deflected.
Once you just like when you pull back dry firing a boat, right? When you pull it back, if you let go of the string, it snaps and it hurts the bow. Same exact thing with the valve train. It snaps back every time it's loaded.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And Joe, just like that, 45 minutes is gone. How about that?
Haven't started yet.
Right.
But to your point, Lake, you were out at the Thunder Valley Nationals and you did a nitro school, and it was kind of exactly this in that, the difference between a NA gasoline engine, like you might find in Hartford's car, versus these nitro engines. And I don't want to say I'm desensitized, because I'm not. I'm amazed by them. But like all these different extra layers that Ben and Billy keep bringing up, it seems to me like that, the nitro is the real test of any engine system, right? Like if you can do it with nitromethane, and they are to amazing success, by the way, everything seems easier after that. Is that accurate?
There's the heat and pressure involved in the nitromethane is kind of unlike anything that we see sustained. A nitrous bromide has the highest peak pressure, but like Ben said, it's only for a millisecond. It's only for a couple of degrees. The nitro, it just keeps going and going and going. And so that puts a ton of heat into them too.
Yeah, and from a power level, Joe, in some ways that's almost easier to deal with, right? Like it's more forgiving. But when you have, say, one of those Pro Stock engines where you've got to tune the engine to take advantage of that maximum cylinder pressure within a very narrow window. And if you miss it, if you're too early or too late, man, your performance suffers, right? So you're trying to literally land on the tip of a needle there to capture all that cylinder pressure at exactly the right moment. Whereas with a fuel car, when it's basically the same cylinder pressure from, top dead center to 40 after top dead center, as far as making power, it's somewhat more forgiving that way. Controlling it and not having it annihilate the rest of the engine, totally different story, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of it being somewhat forgiving, if you don't get, maybe you didn't get the port just right, or the valve job just right, or you missed a few degrees on the camshaft one way or another, there's such an excess of power there anyway. Most of it, as you know, is being turned into clutch dust for the first 200 feet. I feel like in some ways that's easier than trying to, you look at Pro Stock, the number 1 qualifier and the number 16 qualifier, there's like a tenth and a half or something between the whole field. So you just cannot miss anywhere on that car, from the driver's foot letting the clutch out all the way to the wheelie bar at the back. If any one thing is off, you just don't get another chance at it, and the engine tuning is no different on those things. They're real sensitive.
Interesting. I was able to overhear a conversation with Jimmy Prock in Bristol about cylinder pressure, and it was we had good air and then we had bad air, and everything else was mostly the same. And so it was, how do you deal with this situation? And he was like, bad air, up the pressures. And so all the different adjustments that they had to make to accomplish that on the fly, I think, is what makes it interesting. And that's the competition of it all, like who can do that and manage it and make it live and go down the racetrack, which is why it's awesome. All right, guys, as Lake mentioned, we are starting to run short on time. I know everybody's got a couple of things they got to handle. We do have a few other graphs and charts that I know you wanted to get into, Lake. So why don't you just guide us through a couple of these different things? And this is as related to Billy and his particular area of expertise. So why don't you walk us through?
Yeah, that's the ugly one. Move that one. Yeah.
Well, go back to the one that for a second. That's nice. That's where you want to be. Go back for a second.
You want
that one? We have to start there. So
yes.
We were talking about Dr. Marburg earlier and what a great friend he is and everything. So this is an example of, we're going in the Wayback Machine several years ago. Then Billy and I were working on oils and break-in, flat tappet cams and stuff. That's actually the radius, the crown on a flat tappet lifter. Now move to the next one.
Yep.
So when we talk about a camshaft breaking in, what do we see, Billy?
No, I mean, it was amazing because it matched. That's a different width. So it looks like this one's not quite as pointed, but it actually is exactly the same radius. We joked about the old guys not always being right. But when they told us that, hey, the lifter and the camshaft lobe mate to the same radius when they break in, that the camshaft matches the lifter, I mean, we know today that was 100% right, that they match almost exactly when they get through. You can see the part on the very, very left of this graph where the line is squigglier on the third one. You can see that part of the camshaft's the original shape, but the rest of the camshaft face is matched that lifter.
Absolutely.
So
just kind of fun stuff.
I mean, some of those guys, I mean, those guys were just amazing what they could do. And this is the system Mark Malberg did. He came over to comp and we talked about what we wanted to do. And he took a Zeiss profilometer and skidless system and mated it with his software. And we took an old CMM, put it together. This was a beautiful system for measuring camshafts. But I mean, Lake and I measured everything. We measured bores on two-stroke motorcycle, go-kart engines. There was just about nothing we wouldn't stick underneath there to look. Hey, what this looks like.
You see, surface vision isn't just for piston rings.
No,
it's important for piston rings. Actually, I'd say it's critical for piston rings. But surface finish isn't just for piston rings. Everything in the engine.
That's one of those tools where, like, they say when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you have a profilometer, like everything looks like something you want to measure. Like I want to know how rough that is.
No, it's funny because it's like these parts. How they interact is all at the surface side. So if you want to know what's going on, you've got to know your surfaces because they're they're the only thing that gets to interact. There's that nice little coating of oil between them, but even it, has a certain layer as you put more and more load. And when you get into a mixed condition, then it's all about surface finish. The oil is gone, I'm out of here.
I mean, looking at surface finishes is like having a good microscope. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, how many years did we have all these parts failures when you're like, I don't know, must have been a bad batch of parts. I mean, how many times have that been blamed for a failure? And it's simply the way we prepared the parts or the way, we didn't check the parts or we didn't know to look for a specific thing. And so the more we get into surface finishes and start looking at things like that, the more we're preventing some of these failures from happening in the first place. And now it's no longer the mystery failures,
Right. And so many of the terms that we used, have some, RA tells like 1% of the story. A lot of your, some of these RPVs, RPK, some of the different ones that we used, they don't do good with different frequencies, so they can lie to you. So Mark does great presentations on each of the parameters, what does that mean? But when it comes to the end of the day, once you learn all the parameters, but until you see a lot of the plots, then you go, oh, kind of like seeing that plot. We can look at the radius and everything, be like, hey, look, these two go together, like
that one looks like this. Okay, I get it now.
Yeah, you just turn the sheet over and lay them aside, side of glass. Hey, Blake, look, they're the same.
Mark does such a good job with his training videos. If you ever watch that digital, like that notepad series that he does, awesome. He comes off so good at it because he just absolutely knows the information inside and out, and he's not reading off a cue card. He's not rehearsing. He's just talking about what he knows about and is passionate about. And man, I love watching his videos. He is so good at that.
No, I mean, that was his, he doesn't talk a lot about it. That was his dissertation like 2 or 3 decades ago when he was getting his PhD, was on surface finish in automotive diesel applications. But, then he had a, career doing that for a major diesel OE. And then when he went out and did his own, it's not like he's having to think about this stuff or looking this stuff up. He knows it. It'd be like you asking me about my grandson. You know what I mean? It's like, how many pictures do you want to see?
Well, we're so lucky to have him as kind of in our group, right? Yeah. We've got this group of guys who are all together that have a passion for performance and making things better and just can't leave things alone. And it's great that Mark's one of us in that regard.
Oh, absolutely.
He's in the club for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Joe,
now we're at an hour.
Give or take. Ben?
Yeah.
Oh, I said, did we do anything interesting today? Did you pick up any nuggets on hidden horsepower today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to go start my own metrology business, actually. You guys are...
Hey, and if you ever want to have a hard time with bad air and nitro, go and get Ashley Force's old A fuel car and get that thing out, because Darian will tell you it would run different every 50 feet of density altitude. That car was a different car.
Wow. Well, that's, the A fuel thing is now going into the funny car realm, and people are trying to get them running, and they got to start with the whole process again. And it makes you aware of how long it took to get them to where they are now, where they go down the track pretty easily, the A fuel cars. It will be interesting to watch as the funny car guys go through that. And race day, we can have a rainstorm come through. It can change everything, and they still want to win. So you got to figure it out one way or another. You got to figure it out. And the same guys figure it out all the time. It's that Jimmy Prox and the Dickie Venables and the Dean Antonellis and a couple others getting into the mix, but they have a very unique knowledge.
No, and
that's why the drag racers are the best weathermen I know.
Yeah, I mean, 1 year.
Yeah, they're way better than the guys on the news, right?
Yeah,
I guarantee you, Gary Stennett is a better weatherman than anyone on the 5 o'clock news anywhere in the country.
Yeah, they had a cold front go through in Daytona 1 year at the 24 Daytona, and it blew up like 6 or 7 of the cars because they were tuned for one weather system. All of a sudden, it gets 30 degrees colder in Daytona, blows up, a third of the field.
I've seen that before too. World of Outlaw World Finals. They would hot lap the stuff in the afternoon, and it's November, and so it can still be kind of warm in North Carolina during the day in November, but at night it was dead cold. The density altitude changed 1,500 feet in 3 hours.
Wow,
that's going to be carnage.
Yeah. It was absolute carnage. I remember out there, everyone was blowing up everything, but it was an extreme change.
Yep.
All right, Lake, final thought. If there's something that we didn't get in that needs to get in this episode, of course, everybody knows they want to hear the audio only. They go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. We've got a couple of great episodes coming. We've got a couple of great episodes up there. Of course, you guys are rocking the YouTube channel, which this is available there as well. But if there's anything we didn't get in, if there's anything, you want to put Ben or Billy on the spot, now is the time before we get on out of here.
No, I'm going to be nice to him and say, thank you guys for taking some time out of your day. I know Billy's got a lot of stuff going on. Ben's getting ready to go to Australia, so everyone's busy. But I thank everybody for putting the time together and wanting to give back, because this little nugget, right? When Billy mentioned the ABA testing fallacy at the AERAD a couple months ago, I was like, wait, this is a topic for hidden horsepower. I know it's heresy, but I think when you look at it, and as both of them explained their experience and how it can be misleading, it's not wrong. You just got to look at it with the right perspective. And I think hopefully we were able to accomplish that today and maybe open some minds on how to approach unlocking that hidden horsepower. You see how I did that? I worked it all the way back in.
System B, and then it works. Yeah.
Systems-based approaches.
Yeah.
Well, and that's great. Billy, anything you want to say to the audience out there? Like I obviously know that the people who are the engine builders who are here already, like we know what they're looking for, right? They're looking for knowledge, but practical knowledge. Like, how can I put this in practice with whatever I'm doing? Can you maybe?
No, just be real careful. Realize that when you make changes, that you've just got to re-optimize. And try to, when you're trying something, if you know why it should work before you try it, it's going to give you the confidence to stick with it and rub on it and try to get it to go better. If you know this part should do better because of this, whether it's a ring, like Lake gives you this, this better ring package, whether it's a home, whether it's a valve spring, whether it's a cylinder head, whether it's an intake manifold, whether it's a fuel, regardless of what you're doing, if you have a belief that this really should be better, it can give you that commitment to try to re-optimize and work around it. And I think that's all we're trying to tell people to do. Don't go in there and swap a part and be a little bit back and go, oh, that's junk, throw it away. Or you're going to have the wrong push rod 20 years later in your engine.
Ben, you got anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick, I would say I like that he used the word belief, because we talk a lot around here about belief dictates vision, right? So it's real easy to see what you wanted to see. If you go into a test already deciding what you want the answer to be, you will allow the data to steer your direction because you really wanted that to be the right pushrod or the right camshaft or whatever. So the only thing worse than no data is bad data, right? And so the biggest thing is just be careful that you're collecting good, accurate, solid data, and then take the emotions out of it and don't let your belief dictate your vision. Allow the data to speak to you and say, this is what the engine's telling me. It doesn't matter if I really wanted my special new cam lobe to be the right one, right? We have to allow the data to steer it and not our emotions.
Absolutely.
Amen. Yeah.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate you. Ben and Billy, going to kick you guys out. We'll see you on the next one. Lake, you stay put. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Billy. Lake Speed Jr. Obviously, this is an exercise in education for a lot of people, but it's also entertainment, right? I get in the middle, Lake. I find myself like, I don't know if I'll ever be able to use this information, but I think I will on the mic at the NHRA or certainly one of our Total Seal Trackside Tech Talks. Speaking of which, when will be the next?
So the next Trackside Tech Talk is going to be at the U.S. Nationals, the Big Go in Indy. But the neat thing is going to be we're going to kind of have a three-peat here, like a 3 in a row. So we're going to do Indy, we're going to do Maple Grove, and Charlotte. And I'm not sure what exact order. I know Indy's the first one, but we're going to do those 3 races, and they are consecutive. So we'll give everybody, in a wide swath of the country, a good chance to come to an NHRA race, have a great time, see all this awesome top fuel, see the pro stock, see all these great cars run, but get a chance to get some education as well, because we're going to do 3 tech talks, 3 races in a row. Ought to be a lot of fun.
Yes, Indy, Maple Grove, Charlotte, as the order it was last year. I assume it is the same this year. And I can tell you Maple Grove is going to be the biggest one. I can already say from now on experience, that's pro stock country. They love it. They love stockers. They love everything up there. A bunch of engine builders up there at the Grove. Going to be great. Lake, thank you very much. This was educational and awesome. I appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, sir.
There he goes. Lake Speed Jr. I'm Joe Costello. Remember, guys, Hidden Horsepower, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. It's about subscribing. Write a comment, write a review, all of those things. And if you're watching on YouTube as well, the same situation. We appreciate all you. This was very educational, and you're going to use this information not far from now. And so thank you very much. Appreciate all you guys. We'll see you on the next one. Hidden Horsepower, presented by Total Seal.